your mark.
On your mark.
Get set.
Get set.
Now ready.
Ready, go.
Provocative, engaging, and usually quite a lady.
Okay, they're asking for it.
Deborah, go.
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Deborah Rowe podcast. Well, it looks as though the government, once again, we're here to help. Right here in Illinois, the state wants to teach homeschoolers a lesson. Well, that's what I see. It's Illinois' House Bill 2827. It's also known as the Homeschool Act. And what it is essentially is it's a bill where the state wants to regulate homeschooling. Now, in parts of the country, in fact, in 39 states, there is some level of regulation for homeschoolers. Some states a lot more than others. In New York, in California, in Rhode Island, and maybe even in Maine, they really regulate the homeschoolers. Here in Illinois, they're working on getting this bill into law. And what it does, it gives state officials more control over homeschooling. It'll require them to notify their local districts if a parent plans on homeschooling. So if someone says, you know what, I want to homeschool my child, then they're going to be required to notify the state of their decision to do so. Now, that in and of itself, it's not a terrible idea. It's not a bad idea. We don't require that now, and we've done just fine. So either way for me, it's not a big deal. If they would just stop there, no harm, no foul. But that's not what they're doing. They want to go way too far. In addition to parents, homeschoolers, or people wanting to homeschool, having to notify the government that they're going to be homeschoolers, if they fail to register their children with the state, they can be charged with a misdemeanor. This is a Class C misdemeanor, and you can face up to 30 days in jail. Now, how's that helping? I mean, seriously, you take a parent or both parents, I don't know, out of the home and put them in jail for 30 days because they didn't notify the state that they're educating their children at home. That is not helpful. The bill also includes if school officials feel that a homeschooled child isn't receiving an adequate education, they can send an investigator into the home and force the parent to turn over the curriculum, turn over the child's work, and if that parent refuses to do so, there's the misdemeanor. If they comply, and if the investigator or the state official is not satisfied, they can initiate an investigation with the Department of Children and Family Services. They can say, we need you to take a look at this family because something's just not right here. Yeah, they're homeschoolers. Yeah, I've seen the curriculum. Yeah, I've seen the kids work, but it's just something that's not right. We need DCFS to check into this family. The bill also requires that the homeschooler, the parent, maybe the grandparent, I don't know, but it requires that they have either a high school diploma or GED. Really? Seriously? It's interesting because having a high school diploma or a GED guarantees what? Especially if they have come out of public schools in the modern era. Guarantees what? It made me think about something I read, maybe 2-3 months ago, that in New Jersey, they're even allowing teachers to teach who are not proficient in math or reading. Huh? So, but Illinois says we're not going to allow a parent to teach their child if they haven't graduated high school or at least have a GED. You know whose parent, she was a single mom, didn't have a high school diploma and didn't have a GED and hadn't graduated from, I don't even think, grammar school? Dr. Ben Carson's mom. Yeah, Dr. Carson's mom, she was uneducated. She was illiterate, but she desired her son to do well. And she had him sit there, go over his homework, read aloud to her, and study. And he became the world's leading neurosurgeon. It's no guarantee because you have a high school diploma or a GED that you're going to do better for your children if you're a homeschooler. It's ridiculous. Well, homeschoolers, they are not just sitting back and going to just roll over and allow the state to impose themselves into their lives and the lives of their families, particularly when it comes to educating their children. So they have their lawyer, a guy by the name of Estrada, last name Estrada, and he spoke at the committee hearing. And here's what he had to say.
Here are the two harmful things that HB 2827 would do. The first one is it would allow the regional offices of education in Chicago public schools to come in at any time and do reviews of the family's educational portfolio. Section 40 has been billed as just applying to when a family comes up before DCFS, but there's actually several different parts of it. I want to read the last sentence of Section 40. The Regional Office of Education, Intermediate Service Center, or School District has the power to conduct an investigation to see if a homeschool declaration form under Section 20 has been submitted for their child and any other investigations, plural, as needed. Section 25C gives these same authorities the power to request the educational portfolio at any time. This will be a burden particularly on vulnerable communities, those who lack privilege to hire attorneys, and other people who are most at risk of coming into contact with our criminal justice system.
So as you can see, despite the proponents of the bill basically saying the only thing we want is to know who's educating the kids. We just want them to register and it's not a big deal. But Attorney Estrada has gone through the bill with a fine-tooth comb. All the reports that I've seen do indicate that the state will also have the privilege, if you will, or have the authority, a better choice of words, to come into that home anytime they want. If they want to come into that home 6 times in the course of a month to check up on Johnny, they'll have the ability to do that. And while there, and you'll hear a little bit more about this in just a moment, but while there, maybe they see something else that has nothing to do with reading, writing, or math. They may want to report that because they're inside the home and the bill will give them the latitude to make these kinds of requests for investigations based upon other things. Let Attorney Estrada continue.
Which leads me to the final harm that HB 2827 will do. Criminalization of the failure to file a piece of paperwork. We heard a lot about where Illinois stands with other states. Not one single state in the nation, even highly regulated states like New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, make it automatic criminal Class C misdemeanor, 30 days in prison if convicted, $500 fine, criminal conviction, potential removal of children and placed in temporary foster care if you fail to file paperwork. Pennsylvania, for example, which has high regulation, says that it goes through a 30-day review process, independent, impartial review, and then the highest penalty is you can't homeschool for 12 months. This will make our most vulnerable communities at risk to prison, a criminal conviction, when we're going in a direction of trying to reduce the people in the criminal justice system. I could go on, but we've got some great witnesses. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
This is serious business. They are making every effort, every attempt to exert more government control over families. And interestingly enough, these are families who have less involvement with the government merely because they don't educate their children through the public school system. They do it themselves at home. And that is very troubling for government officials. They don't want you to have that kind of autonomy. They just don't. So this is not just about raising standards, raising the bar so that children are better protected, that we can ensure that all kids are educated. No, this is draconian. This is like the iron fist coming down hard on families. So what is the status of this bill? A couple of days ago now, it passed out of the Education Policy Committee, and that was by a vote of 8-4. Now, if it passes a House floor vote, then the bill goes to the full House for a vote. After that, to the Senate. And after that, to the desk of none other than Governor J.B. Pritzker for his signature. Now, there are questions. People are wondering, will he sign that bill if it reaches his desk? And will he stand up and protect the rights of these homeschooling families? Seriously? Seriously? That's not a serious question. And I did see someone on one of the reports asking, well, we don't know what the governor's going to do. We do know what he's going to do if it reaches his desk. There is absolutely nothing in J.B. Pritzker's track record to show that he will support families, to show that he will protect children. So no, if it comes across his desk, yes, he will sign it. And that will spell trouble, trouble, trouble. So why do people homeschool? We homeschooled for just a very short period of time, and we did it at a point in my daughter's life when she needed to be out of school. She needed to be home. And I have to really say my husband did most of the homeschooling for, it was about 2 years. It's not an easy job, but some of the reasons why people homeschool, they may not be satisfied with the academics that are provided at their local school. They may not be satisfied with that. Maybe they want to provide a moral instruction or religious instruction. Maybe they have a specific issue that they really feel that they could best address for their child. Maybe it's a learning issue. Maybe the child has a health need. Sometimes parents feel, oh, I can do this better than anybody else. Sometimes it's a concern about safety. I had a lady that I used to work with years ago, and she kept her son home. She kept him home because the poor kid had become terrified, and I mean literally terrified of going to school. Why? He was afraid of violence. He was afraid of gang activity. He was afraid of bullying. And she finally was able to coax him back to school. It was quite some time. He was older, and I don't know what happened, but the point of it is sometimes it's an issue like that. Sometimes it's just a lot of negative peer pressure. Maybe it's just too much pressure on a kid. Maybe it's bullying. Maybe they just want the individualized attention that learning at home offers, as opposed to being in a classroom. Even if it's a classroom of, say, 18, that's 18 children who will need the attention of the teacher. Now, unless they're in a gifted program or on the other end of the spectrum, if they're in a special needs program, those are basically the only two groups in public school settings that get more individualized attention. So maybe that's a concern. Whatever the reasons are, for me, it boils down to this. They have a right to do it, and it's their choice. That, to me, is the bottom line. Whatever the reasons are, or maybe it's just one reason, it's their right, and if they make that choice, they should have the freedom by which to do that. There are a lot of critics. I don't think there are nearly as many critics as today as it was when we were doing this, and even well before we were doing it. People used to say, you don't want to homeschool your child because they will not develop social skills. They will be weird. And that is absolutely not true. We know that because there is evidence that shows that kids that are homeschooled, they actually do very well. Evidence with test scores. They actually score very well. Evidence with the research, which shows that homeschoolers, they do well academically. They do well emotionally. They do well socially. In fact, I was reading and just preparing for the podcast today that homeschoolers graduate at a much higher rate than kids from public schools. 69% of homeschoolers that go on to college graduate from college versus 57% of public schoolers. And that's impressive. Now, when it comes to high school graduation, particularly in Illinois, I don't know about the other states, but in Illinois, it's hard to put a number there because homeschoolers, they don't have to report the graduation rates. They can have their own graduations. And by the way, many homeschoolers are part of homeschooling communities. There's so many homeschooling communities out there. Well, they can do their own diplomas. And then some people might say, well, how do we know they're meeting standards? If a mom is issuing her own diploma for her kid, well, I look at it this way. If that parent is taking the time to develop a curriculum, or they even have these things now, you can buy them, you can order them online. But if they are developing and using a curriculum to teach that child, creating this very structured environment for learning, they're going to make sure that their kid is meeting whatever standards that are set. And we know this again because while we may not have the hard data for high school graduation rates versus public school graduation rates, we do know that when they go to college, they outpace public school students. So here again, what's the issue here? Let me tell you what the proponents of this House bill are saying. I read an article in ProPublica, and it was a story about a little boy, I don't know what his age was. I think his name was Tim. And Tim stopped going to school. They did talk to Tim's mother. And Tim's mother was 37 years old. She had 11 children. Her partner or her husband, he was 59 years old. He used a wheelchair. He was on disability. And Tim's mom said in the article she didn't have trouble with any of her children except for Tim. So I'm assuming the school officials or somebody reached out and they wanted to know, where's Tim? And she said he's being homeschooled. So someone that was quoted in the article, a lawyer, I'm assuming for the school board, says that when they got to court, because they took her to court, they got her there. And when she was up, she said that the reason Tim hasn't been in school is because he's being homeschooled. And right there, according to the article, the lawyer knew that he'd lost the case. So the whole point of the article was all parents have to do is throw up the shield of I'm homeschooling and we cannot protect these children. Sadly, that story ended with Tim taking a gun and accidentally shooting himself and he died. That story, I actually saw a video where the person who was speaking on behalf of let's get this legislation passed, she referenced Tim's story as well. For me, it's a tragic story, but unfortunately, we also see many children who are harmed, who are killed, and they attend public schools. So that in and of itself, that example is not enough. And Tim's mom obviously needed more support. So because she needed more support, we're going to bring down the iron hammer on all of the state's homeschooling families? Doesn't make any sense. And if they're trying to make the argument that there's something very, very insidious going on inside those homes, or at the very least, we can't really say for sure because we don't have the right to get inside those homes. And that's essentially what they're saying. We need them to register. We need them to give us the curriculum. We need to know what's happening. We need to see the homework. Then why the heck are they homeschooling? If the government is going to have that much involvement, why are they homeschooling? And I kind of think that's the point. They don't want them homeschooling. Certainly not without the government's involvement. That defeats the entire purpose because I tell you what, that bill, as was highlighted by Attorney Estrada, if a school official, if a state official comes into the home, takes a look at the curriculum and says, that's not good enough. Well, guess what? Do you think it's going to stay there? No. That parent is going to have enormous pressure put on them to bring it to the standard that the official feels it should meet. This is where this is headed. You don't have to be like a genius to figure that out. So I'm wondering, why mess with what's working? We know that homeschooling works. We know this. This is not a question. The more government gets involved, the more problems will arise. And you can take that to the bank. It's not all gloom and doom for public schools either. There's new data out that shows that 8th graders outperform the national average in both reading and in math in Illinois. But wait, hold on. Ooh, in reading, the proficiency rate is 33%, and in math, it's 32%.
Aw, why?
Well, they're still above the national average.
You gotta be kidding me.
But despite these very, very unimpressive numbers, state legislators, those who are in favor of this bill, they seem to be completely oblivious to the condition of the state's public schools. There are districts where they have more affluence, better schools, but better is almost becoming relative because many of these districts, they have proficiency levels at 40%, 50%, and some even a little higher. But that's nothing to jump up and shout about. Yet, they are insisting that they take on the additional responsibility of regulating homeschoolers. I want you to take a listen to Representative Tara Howard. She is the person that drafted this piece of legislation.
Education is a fundamental right for every child. However, we know that loopholes exist, and we have a duty to ensure that children actually receive an education. This is not something we want to be an outlier on.
Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I really don't understand what it means to educate children. Did you hear what she said?
And we have a duty to ensure that children actually receive an education.
Maybe she's not aware of what's starting to happen in some places around the country. Recently, a couple of young men graduated high school, and now they are suing because they're illiterate. Oh, but they're not the only ones. There are other stories, former students suing their public schools. I was reading this story about a young lady, Alicia Ortiz. She's out of Connecticut. She's 19 years old. She was told and she believed that she had become an honor student. She graduated with honors. Why wouldn't she think that? However, as she tried to continue her education, she found out she's basically illiterate. There's a story out of Clarkston, Tennessee. A guy who graduated with a 3.4 GPA. Couldn't even read. Barely spell his name. Schools were well aware of this. I'm excited to see this actually, because this has been going on for a long, long time, where schools are just passing them through. And I'm not just blaming teachers, because this is a complicated issue. But you have so many kids who are graduating school, graduating high school, and they are illiterate. Take a listen to what this Cornell law professor Jacobson has to say about this.
I think these cases reflect a deeper problem in education. For each of these cases, there are probably tens of thousands of students who don't sue, who never got a proper education. They get pushed along the system. Unfortunately, in many different ways, we've created incentives for particularly public school systems to just push students along and not to hold them accountable. So I think these cases are a symptom of a much deeper problem. In fairness to the teachers and in fairness to the school districts, they're caught between various forces pushing against each other. On the one hand, there's oftentimes money tied to performance, and if you fail students, if you don't advance them, that could affect the funding that the school district gets. And school districts, to some extent, are caught in the middle. Obviously, it varies district to district. Some have perfectly good intentions. Some have maybe not good intentions and just want to go along to get along. But this is a real problem, and it's a failure at its core of our educational system.
Public schools really cannot make a compelling case for homeschoolers to enroll their children. I mean, they really can't. And if HB 2827 passes, could the state apply pressure so that some parents begin to consider it? More students means more money. It's how schools are funded in part in Illinois. Plus, with the Department of Education being dismantled, billions of dollars are about to flow into the states. Personally, I wish they could bypass the states and put the money directly into the schools or some combination of schools and parents, but we all know what the states are going to do with that money. it won't be used as effectively. I'll put it that way. But don't dismiss the idea that money plays a factor in this decision to take on homeschooling, because there's a shift going on in education. More and more families are considering homeschooling. In fact, they're doing more than considering it. They're homeschooling. It's actually a pretty significant shift that's happening. The fastest growing group for homeschooling are children of color.
Black parents have pulled their children from public school in droves post-pandemic, says William James, professor of education at Cal State Long Beach.
The U.S. Census Bureau does report that homeschooling is way up. And this is among all races combined. Maybe it's up about 60% or so versus pre-pandemic levels. But for African Americans in particular, the number has quadrupled, even quintupled.
According to Barna research, a majority of homeschool households are non-white, split evenly between Hispanic and Black families. Whites, who constitute about 2/3 of American households, represent 41% of homeschool households. Now, that data represents a national picture. This is what's happening nationally. But make no mistake about it. The number of minorities who are deciding to homeschool, that number is growing. And Illinois is no exception. And it really does make a lot of sense because many, many minority children are in failing schools. It just makes sense because most parents want better for their children. So this is really going to be a fight. It's going to be a really tough fight. And we will hear more and more stories about how children are at risk in an unregulated environment when it comes to education. How parents who themselves don't have a high school diploma or a GED are ill-equipped to educate their children. We know that's a lie. How parents use the shield of homeschooling to hide neglect. Come on. What you will not hear are the hard statistics about what's happening. And again, I'm focusing right now on Illinois. What you will not hear is what's happening in Illinois schools. Because statewide, I was looking at this on IllinoisReportCard.com. Good hard data. But there were over 211,000 incidents of violence in schools in Illinois. I believe that was for last year. We have a truancy issue, absenteeism, and I already shared with you the proficiency levels. It's not a good look, but they're going to keep the drumbeat going. They're only trying to help. We're from the government. And we're here to help.
You sure about that?
Please, I don't want you to think that I'm anti-government. I am not anti-government. But I do not believe in government overreach. And the moment we start talking about parents at homeschool facing Class C misdemeanors because they want to stand for their rights, because they don't want to adhere to standards that are apparently failing, I've got a problem with that. I really liked what this one parent had to say. She was testifying during the hearings for this bill. She's a proponent of homeschooling.
It's based on the underlying assumption that education cannot work without legislators and district bureaucrats and school administrators. But the reality is that education cannot work without parents.
And that's so true, whether your children attend public schools or are being homeschooled. And if you're of the mind that none of this matters because, hey, I don't have kids in school or I don't live in Illinois, this is a nationwide issue. And whether we have children at home or whether we don't, the fact of the matter is these are the people who will grow up and they'll take the place of our aging workforce. This is a reality. So we do want educated, qualified people, right? Because if they're not, the results could be disastrous.
I can't have trouble reading this.
No, never mind, Joe.